Greetings. Welcome to my podcast that features my book, Colonial American History Stories, 1215 through 1664. This episode relates the story of Christopher Columbus. Greetings. Today I will pick up the story begun with Magna Carta of 1215 and continue with the marriage of King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile. The marriage of the two sovereigns that would set Spain off on its course of colonial empire and world dominance began in a swirl of political intrigue and a secret elopement. Isabella I of Castile, April the 22nd, 1451 through November the 26th, 1504. The daughter of John II of Castile and Isabella of Portugal, Isabella was native to the city of Madrigal de los Altos Toros, Avia in west-central Spain. She had a brother, Alfonso. This was a tumultuous era in Spain's history, and resources were stretched thin, even for those of royal blood. Second in line to the throne behind Alfonso, her half-brother Henry ruled as King of Castile. Isabella's living conditions as a child were frugal at best. At times there was little food, and sometimes the household struggled to find proper clothing. The royal household suffered an almost continuous shortage of money. Isabella received a good education in spite of the living conditions. Henry had become King of Castile on July 21st, 1454, 3 years before Isabella's birth. Political marriages. Henry plotted advantageous marriages for his young half-sister at an early age, betrothing her to Ferdinand, the son of John II of Navarre, when she was 6. This betrothal was short-lived, but Henry continued to plot. Henry married Blanche II of Navarre in 1540. But the union produced no children, as Henry was unable to consummate the marriage. Henry blamed this condition on a curse, one that affected only relations with his wife. Pope Nicholas V annulled the marriage, paving the way for Henry's eventual marriage to Joan of Portugal. The union produced a daughter, Joanna, in 1462. Political enemies of Henry continually questioned Joanna's parentage, claiming Henry did not sire her. After Joanna's birth, Henry summoned his 11-year-old half-sister to court, where her living conditions improved. Civil War. Henry named Joanna as his heir, but conflicts among the nobles concerning her paternity caused Henry to compromise, naming his half-brother Alfonso as his heir. Civil war began when Henry reneged on this arrangement and began supporting his daughter again. The rebelling nobles conducted an insurrection during which they named Alfonso king. This dispute ended when Alfonso died suddenly of a disease, though many suspected poison. At his death, he left his throne to his sister Isabella. Avoiding civil war, Isabella and Henry agreed that Isabella would be his official heir. She could marry only with his permission, but he could not force marriage on her. Ferdinand II of Aragon, March the 10th, 1452, through January the 23rd, 1516. The son of John II of Aragon and Juana Enriquez, Ferdinand was native to Seda Palace, Sos del Rey Catalico, Kingdom of Aragon. John saw to it that Ferdinand received an excellent education, well grounded in the humanities and government. Ferdinand was an ardent supporter of the arts and music. John named Ferdinand his heir in 1461. He would become King of Sicily by virtue of his father's alliances in 1468. Marriage to Isabella. Henry had continued to find a political union for Isabella that suited his needs. He betrothed her to Pedro Girón Acuda Pachero, a union that repelled Isabella. Thankfully for her, Pedro died while she was traveling to meet him. He attempted to marry her to Alfonso V of Portugal, a union she rebuffed. She made a secret promise during this time to marry the young, handsome Prince Ferdinand of Castile. He was 17, she was 18. Isabella and Ferdinand were second cousins by virtue of a common descent from John I of Castile. Thus they would need a special papal dispensation. Ferdinand had his supporters prepare the document, which later turned out to be forged. Ferdinand crossed into Castile in disguise to meet Isabella, who had slipped away from her brother's court. They married on October the 19th, 1469, at the Palacio de los Vero in the city of Valladolid. The union would last until Isabella's death in 1504 and produce 5 children. Isabella succeeded to the throne of Castile in 1474, Ferdinand to the throne of Aragon in 1479.
Neither monarch had any political power in each other's realm. However, they ran their kingdoms with united goals. Each kingdom retained its own laws. However, their efforts led to the eventual conquest of the remainder of Spain when they drove out the Muslims, completing the Reconquista in 1492.
Greetings. Today I will pick up the story and tell you about the beginnings of Christopher Columbus's saga with his initial meeting with Queen Isabella on May the 1st, 1486. He had spent months lobbying the Queen to hear his theories about reaching the East by sailing west. First, I will relate a brief biography of Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus, circa 1451 through May the 20th, 1506. Many things about the early life of history's most renowned explorer are still a mystery to historians. They have not been able to pin down the exact date of his birth or the location. Most believe he entered the world in the Republic of Genoa in northern Italy. We have anglicized his name to Christopher Columbus. However, in his native Genovese, his name was Cristoforo Colombo. The Spanish call him Cristobal Colon. His father worked as a wool weaver in both Genoa and Savona. He also owned a cheese stand at which young Christopher worked while a boy. Most believe his mother was Susanna of Fontanrosa. She also bore 4 other children, Bartolomeo, Giovanni, Giacomo, and a daughter named Biacinetta. Columbus claimed he first went to sea at the age of 10 in one of his letters. Early life. By 1473, Columbus had begun his seafaring career. Between the years 1473 and 1477, he apparently traveled to the Aegean island of Chios. He also sailed with an armed convoy to England and Ireland. There is a possibility that he visited the Norse colony on Iceland. In 1479, he married the daughter of a Portuguese knight of Santiago, Filipa Moniz Perestello. She bore Christopher his son, Diego, in 1479 or 1480. Columbus had one other illegitimate son, Ferdinand, by Beatriz Enriquez de Arena. The fate of Columbus' wife, Filipa Moniz, remains a mystery. Some accounts say she died in 1485. Others say Columbus walked out on her. Regardless, by 1485 she was out of his life when he began his quest to find a sponsor for his proposed explorations. Self-taught education. Columbus learned to speak and read 3 languages, Latin, Portuguese, and Castilian. He also studied astronomy, geography, and history. Somehow he learned about the trade winds that rode through the equatorial regions. Whether he learned by personal experience or by conversation with sailors, no one really knows. He also read the works of Claudius Ptolemy. He studied Sir John Mandeville and Pliny's Natural History. Pope Pius II's Historia Rerum Umbigatorum rounded out his reading fare. Through these works and others, he arrived at his theory of reaching the East by sailing west. It was all about trade. Until 1453, the land trade route over the Silk Road to Asia had been reasonably safe. When the Ottoman Turks conquered the last stanchion of the Roman Empire, Constantinople, in 1453, the route became more dangerous. With lucrative trade with China and India cut off, European kings and merchants sought a safer, faster route to the Orient. They desperately wanted the silk, spices, and other exotic wares of these lands. Christopher Columbus thought he had the answer. Competing theories. Washington Irving's biography of Columbus in 1828 planted the idea that in 15th century scholars thought the earth was flat. Though many people at the time believed this was so, most scholars believed that the earth was spherical in shape. The biggest debates came over the size of the earth. Using geography, the astronomer Eratosthenes, who lived from 276 BC through 194 BC, had calculated the Earth's circumference. Claudius Ptolemy, who lived from 90 AD through about 168, also calculated the circumference of the Earth during Roman times. An Arab astronomer had also calculated the Earth's circumference. This Arab, Alfraganus, lived during the 9th century. He wrote a textbook, A Compendium of the Science of the Stars, around 833. Columbus and many other scholars based their belief in the Earth's size on the writings of Alfraganus. His calculations led Columbus to believe that the Earth was 18,765 miles in circumference at the equator. Eratosthenes' calculations indicated a circumference of 24,854. Both men were close, but the confusion came because Alfraganus used the Arabic mile in his calculations. This mile is longer than the standard European mile in use at the time. If you apply the Arabic mile to Alfraganus' calculations, his numbers match Eratosthenes closely. Columbus and many others of that age did not realize this. This is important because Columbus used the smaller number to prove that a voyage across the Atlantic was possible. Columbus travels to Portugal. In 1485, Columbus tried to sell his idea to King John II of Portugal, who was interested. He consulted with his geographers about it. They, believing Ptolemy's numbers, felt that the distance was too far. A 15th century ship simply could not carry enough supplies to make the voyage. King John rejected him twice. Travel to Spain. After the second rejection, Columbus traveled to Spain to consult with Queen Isabella. He gained his first audience with the Queen on May 1st, 1486. After consulting with her science experts, she rejected the proposal for the same reasons her Portuguese counterpart had. She did grant him a living allowance to keep him in Spain, preventing him from entering service with any other European monarch. The Muslims still occupied the Iberian Peninsula. The Spanish monarchs had most of their resources devoted to the Reconquista of El-Andalus. Columbus would have to wait 6 long years for this war to end and allow him another chance to present his proposal to the Queen again. It was during this period that he became involved with Beatriz Enriquez de Arana and had his second son, Ferdinand, in August 1488. During Columbus' first voyage in 1492, she cared for both her son and Columbus' other son, Diego. Greetings. In the last episode, Christopher Columbus held his first interview with Castilian Queen Isabella, who rebuffed his proposal while at the same time granting him an income to keep him in Spain. Columbus tried in vain over the years to convince her of the feasibility of his plan. However, she continued to rebuff him. 6 years passed. While the Spanish monarchs, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, labored to complete the Reconquista and drive the Moors from Spain, they finally met with success on January 2nd, 1492. Expulsion of the Muslims. The combined forces of Queen Isabella of the Kingdom of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon successfully completed the siege of Granada when the Moorish Sultan surrendered the city to the Spanish armies. Reconquista. The Muslim invasion of the Iberian Peninsula in 711 A.D. resulted in a complete conquest in 788 A.D. The Christians began a 781-year war of liberation that bears the name of Reconquista. Most historians begin this battle for reconquest at the Battle of Cordova. This battle probably occurred in 718 or 722 and marked the first big Christian victory in his battles with the Muslims. King Ferdinand II of Aragon's marriage to Queen Isabella I of Castile on October 19, 1469, united their kingdoms. After they wed, the monarchs together began their 20-year struggle to expel the Muslims from Europe. The war against the Emirate of Granada. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella began their war against the Emirate of Granada in 1482. Spanish conquest had driven the last of the Muslim invaders to this region on the southern coast of Spain. The Sultan readied his forces for the last stand against the Spanish onslaught. Siege of Granada. The siege began in April 1491 and ended on January 2nd, 1492, with the surrender of the Muslim rulers. The monarchs had finally successfully ended the Reconquista. The Spanish had driven out the Muslims, a feat they still celebrate as Granada Day. With this conquest complete, they were ready to compete with other European powers in their trade with China. The war ended. The King and Queen of Spain now had funds available for other projects. One of these was the still-in-the-future contract with a man named Christopher Columbus. Greetings. Today I will visit the occasion of the meeting of Christopher Columbus and the Spanish monarchs in which they reached an agreement to fund Columbus's proposed expedition. After many years of patient waiting and lobbying, Christopher Columbus finally achieved his goal. The King and Queen of Spain relented in January 1492. They granted his request for a formal audience and scheduled it for April 17, 1492. They were receptive to Columbus's ideas of a direct route across the Atlantic Ocean, as the current route around the Horn of Africa was a perilously long trip. The agreement. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand met Columbus at court at Alcazar in the southern Spanish city of Cordova. After listening to his plan, Queen Isabella
initially turned him down on the advice of her confessor. After Columbus left the court, he gathered his possessions and started to depart the city on a mule. King Ferdinand intervened, sent a royal messenger after Columbus, and brought him back to court. Contract signed. After many negotiations, they signed a document entitled The Capitulations of Santa Fe. They promised to give him titles Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy, and Governor General. They also promised to make him an honorific Don. They also granted him a 10% share in any riches that the voyage produced. Columbus next began preparations for his historic voyage. Today I will talk about Christopher Columbus's departure from the port of Palos, Isla de Frontera, Spain on August 3, 1492. A new trade route. Columbus and the monarchs had signed the contract promising support for Columbus's voyage on April 17, 1492. The thrust of the voyage was to find a sea route to the spices and silks of the East Indies and China. All the nations of Europe coveted this trade, which the Muslims had interrupted with their conquests in Asia Minor. These disruptions had made the old Silk Road route dangerous and unstable. The alternate sea route around the Horn of Africa was long and tedious. Columbus believed that a route straight across the ocean would lead to Asia. He was right, but he never dreamed that there was a continent in the way. Once they signed the contract, Columbus bent to the task of organizing his voyage. The Spanish town of Palos, Isla de Frontera would serve as a springboard for Columbus's historic voyage. Palos, Isla de la Frontera. King Alfonso XI of Castile had granted Alonso Caro and his wife Berenjuela Gomez the land Palos would occupy in 1322. That year is the town's official founding year. Paleolithic, Tartessian, Roman, Visigothic, and Muslim peoples may have occupied the site previously. The inhabitants of the town were mostly fishermen. Queen Isabella required the inhabitants to contribute to Columbus' efforts. The men involved: Martin Alonso Pinzon and his younger brother Vicente Inez Pinzon assisted Columbus. Martin would command the Pinta and Vicente would command the Nina. Columbus would captain the Santa Maria. Juan Niño of Moher owned the Nina, while Juan de la Casa owned the Santa Maria. Cristobal Quintero owned the Pinta that was nicknamed the Pint, the Look, or the Spotted One. Many members of the crews of the ship came from Palos and the surrounding areas. The combined crews of the ships numbered 87. Masters and pilots were paid 2,000 maravedì per month. Able seamen received 1,000 maravedì per month. Ordinary seamen and ship's boys were paid 666 maravedis per month. At the time of Columbus' voyage, gold was worth 3,000 maravedis per ounce and silver 100 maravedis per ounce. The ships: La Santa Maria de la Immaculada Concepcion, the Santa Maria, was the largest of the three ships. Built in Pontevedra, Galicia, the ship was a type of ship called a carrack. A carrack is a 3- or 4-masted square-rigged ship used for longer voyages by the Spanish and the Portuguese. The Santa Maria would have been about 58 feet long and about 100 tons. It would have been about 18 feet wide and drawn about 10 feet of water. The crew would have numbered about 40 sailors. Merchants typically used carracks for trade. The Pinta was a type of ship called a caravel, and it was Columbus's fastest ship. The Portuguese developed caravels in the 15th century. They were small, maneuverable, 2-masted ships used mostly for exploration. The Pinta was about 56 feet long, 17 feet wide, and about 70 tons. It had a draft of about 8 feet. The crew would have been about 26 men. The Nina was also a caravel, and its name was Spanish for little girl. The Nina became Columbus' favorite ship. It would have been 50 feet long, 16 feet wide, and about 60 tons. It had draft about 7 feet of water and carried a crew of 24. 3 months of planning. On the evening of August 3, 1492, Christopher Columbus and his crew set off. It was a voyage of major consequences. Spain and all of Europe would change completely because of the voyage. The natives of the new lands Columbus discovered would suffer major consequences as well. But on that evening, long ago, the sailors were uncertain about their destination and their fates. However, their place in history was secure. Today you will hear how Columbus established a tradition for later Spanish galleons en route to the Spanish Empire in the New World on his first voyage in 1492. August the 12th, 1492. Christopher Columbus arrives at the Canary Islands. Columbus arrived at the Canary Islands port of San Sebastian on the island of La Gomera 9 days after leaving Palos de la Frontera. Month-long stopover. A few days after the voyage began, the rudder on the Pinta broke. The crew secured the rudder with ropes, a repair that lasted until their arrival on the Canary Islands. While at the islands, Columbus had the ship repaired and the sails of the Nina re-rigged. He also stocked additional provisions on the ships. Columbus heard rumors of a nearby Portuguese flotilla that intended to capture him during his stay. He departed San Sebastian de la Gomera on September the 6th, 1492, on the final leg of his voyage west. His stopover made the Canaries a traditional stopover for later Spanish galleons en route to the New World. Greetings. Today I will discuss the arrival of the small fleet of ships commanded by Christopher Columbus in the Bahamas. October the 12th, 1492. Columbus arrives in the Bahamas. Columbus and his 3 ships departed the Canary Islands on September the 6th, 1492, after getting the broken rudder on the Pinta fixed. They would spend 5 long weeks sailing west over open ocean, measuring the distance sailed. Columbus recorded the distance sailed each day using 2 different measurements. Historians at first believed that he recorded the distances way to deceive the crew. They thought he reported the shorter distances to the crew to quell their fears about sailing so far west, and kept the longer, true measurement secret. However, historians have determined that recording 2 distances was normal for Columbus. One set, indicating longer miles, was in his standard fashion. The shorter set he used the shorter Portuguese leagues to which his crew was accustomed. Magnetic declination. By mid-September, on 13th, Columbus noted that his compass no longer pointed north. He had discovered the phenomenon of magnetic declination. A compass points to magnetic north, not true north. The difference of the angle between the two can vary at different points on the Earth and can change over time. No one in Europe had, until Columbus, seen the phenomenon. Columbus at first did not inform the crew of the variation, afraid the knowledge would spark fears in them. When they did learn of it, he calmed them by telling them that the compass did not point to the North Star, which was the ancient method of determining true north. A compass instead pointed towards some point on the Earth's surface, and that something was interfering with it. His reputation calmed the crew, and the incident passed. Signs of land. By late September, the crew noticed floating vegetation on the surface of the sea. All the sailors took this to mean that land was nearby. On October the 7th, the crew sighted large flocks of birds. They managed to trap a few and to determine that they were field birds of some sort. This allayed their fears somewhat, but not altogether. Columbus changed course of the ships to follow the flight of the birds. Mutiny. By October the 10th, the fears returned. Food and water were getting short. They had gone 5 long weeks with no sign of land. The winds had turned cantankerous and supplies were running low. The sailors feared that they would run out of food and water before they could return to Spain, a not unreasonable fear. Columbus quieted his crew by telling them that if they did not sight land in 2 days, he would turn the ships around and return home. Land. On October the 12th, 1492, at 2 o'clock in the morning, a crewman, Rodrigo de Triana, on the Pinta, gave the cry, "Land!" A feeling of relief flooded the crew. They had made it. They were in Asia. Historians still dispute which island it was, but they do know it was in the Bahamas. The leading candidates for this landing are Samana Cay, Plana Cays, Grand Turk, and San Salvador Island. San Salvador Island received its current name in 1925 from those that believe it is the spot of Columbus's landing. Many also call this island Watling Island, after a famous pirate. Columbus spent little time on the island. He was anxious to reach Japan and reached the banner of the Spanish king and claimed the island for Spain, naming it San Salvador, or Holy Savior. He then continued his explorations. Greetings. Today I will talk about Christopher Columbus learning about an important grain crop that the Amerindians call maize. We call it corn, and it ranks as one of the most important of the crops Europeans would borrow from the Amerindian tribes of North America. November the 5th, 1492, Christopher Columbus learns of maize. The grain crop that Americans call corn has many different types. These include dent corn, flint corn, flour corn, popcorn, sweet corn, waxy corn, and pod corn. Mystery shrouds the origins of maize. Botanists think it originated in the Americas from wild grasses. All varieties probably have similar beginnings through crossings with different forms of grass, gamma grass, and teosinte among the most likely species. These crossings probably occurred naturally, forming the first primitive maize varieties. Archaeologists have found corn pollen in soil samples from soils 200 feet below Mexico City, Mexico, that are 80,000 years old. Scientists also have carbon-dated corn cobs found in New Mexican bat caves that are around 56,000 years old. Most historians think that the first maize varieties originated in the Tehuacan Valley of Mexico. The original wild forms of maize have become extinct. Introduction to Europe. Amerindians further developed the grain which they introduced to Christopher Columbus on his first voyage in 1492, while Columbus explored Cuba on November the 5th. There is disagreement among historians about whether Columbus took maize back to Europe on his first or second voyage. Regardless, he did take it back. Europeans at first considered it a novelty crop, but eventually understood that it was a valuable food source. Cultivation of corn gradually spread over Europe. Next week, I will talk about an article called the Columbian Exchange, which discusses the exchange of agricultural crops between the Old and New Worlds that benefited both the Europeans and the Amerindians. That article is excerpted from another book I wrote entitled History of Gardening and Agriculture. Greetings. Today I will discuss an historical event called the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange is a process that occurred after Christopher Columbus' voyage to the New World in the late 15th century, in which scores of plants and animals were introduced to areas that they had not previously existed. It was a two-way exchange that brought benefits to both cultures. From west to east, Columbus and those that came after him took many plants, seeds, and animals to Spain that proved to be a major economic and dietary boon. The most important were maize, potatoes, and sweet potatoes. Other imports included avocados, beans, bell and chili peppers, black-eyed Susans, cacao, which was the foundation for chocolate, cotton, marigolds, papayas, peanuts, petunias, pineapples, poinsettias, quinine rubber, squashes, including pumpkins, sunflowers, tobacco, tomatoes, turkeys, vanilla beans, and zinnias. From west to east, the Europeans introduced many plants and animals to the New World that had proved immensely important to the native peoples and had a major impact on their culture. Horses, pigs, cows, and chickens were the most important introductions. The Europeans also served as intermediaries between the South American and North American native cultures by bringing potatoes to the North American tribes. Horses had a major impact on the Indians. The horse changed the culture of both Plains Indians and the Rocky Mountain Indians by improving their lives. Other introductions that proved valuable to the natives in the New World included bananas, barley, cabbages, carnations, coffee, daffodils, daisies, dandelions, earthworms, lemons, lettuce, lilacs, olives, oranges, peaches, pears, rice, sugarcane, tulips. Greetings. Today I will tell you about Christopher Columbus's return to Spain. March the 15th, 1493. Christopher Columbus returns to Spain after his first voyage. Columbus departed the New World on January the 16th, 1493. Severe storms enveloped his ship, leading him to seek refuge in what they thought were the Spanish-controlled Canary Islands. Instead, they mistakenly landed on the Portuguese-controlled Azores Islands. The governor of the islands had half Columbus's crew imprisoned. By happenstance, it happened that the imprisoned men were among Columbus's best sailors. He needed these men, so using means unknown to history, he visited the governor again and got them released, and the ship set sail. He landed in Portugal, where he had a meeting with the King of Portugal. Returned to Palos. After staying in Lisbon, Portugal, for several days, Columbus set sail for Spain and entered the port of Palos on March the 15th, 1493. The Spanish have erected a 197-foot tall monument, the Monument a Colom, in 1888 to commemorate Columbus's return. Because of the letter he had written, he found news about his discoveries spreading across Europe. The letter. During his return on the Nina, Columbus wrote a letter detailing the events of his voyage. This letter played an important role in spreading news throughout Europe and about his discoveries. He added a postscript to the letter upon his arrival in Lisbon and, according to his accounts, dispatched 2 copies. One went to Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, the Spanish monarchs that had authorized his voyage. The other went to the main financial backer, Luis de Santiago. Many historians feel that he sent it from Lisbon. Others feel that he waited until his arrival in Palos. At any rate, printers somehow obtained copies of the letter and printed versions began surfacing. These printed versions first surfaced in Spain, then throughout Europe. In Italy, the letter saw over 1,500 copies, making it a bestseller at the time. Contents of the letter. Readers must remember that Columbus' voyage was a commercial venture. Columbus returned carrying no valuable cargo of any kind. It was imperative that he satisfy the voyage's investors. He had to convince them that though he had returned with few goods, the lands he had found had immense potential. He wanted to mount further expeditions and needed financial backing to do so. Thus, he glossed over many things and exaggerated many others. He did not say that he had lost the Santa Maria, only saying that he had left it with the colony established on Hispaniola. He stressed the suitability of the islands he discovered for colonization. He attempted to build the case for further explorations throughout the letter. Colonization for profit. The concept of colonization for profit was a novel idea at the time. Several European countries had overseas colonies, but the practice was not yet widespread. In the letter, Columbus implied the existence of precious metals, spices, and land. The letter targeted the merchants and business people of Europe in hope to attract their interest and money. Aftermath. The letter provoked a great deal of interest in the new lands. They set off a scramble of competition for colonies and land in the New World across the sea. Spain and Portugal became instant rivals for overseas possessions. This fever eventually infected the French, the English, and the Dutch, along with others. The competition led to wars, conquest, and an unprecedented migration of colonists from the Old World to the New. It also led to the decimation, annihilation, and subjugation of the Native American inhabitants. These stories are part of the author's book, Colonial American History Stories, 1215 through 1664, which is part of the Timeline of United States History series by Paul R. Wanning. Readers can find the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and other online retailers, both in softbound and ebook copies. It can also be ordered directly from my website at www.mossyfeetbooks.com. You can contact me at mossyfeetbooks@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.
Next week, in Part 2, I will relate the remainder of Christopher Columbus's first voyage, after which the Part 3 will cover the rest of his voyages and his death. Find out more about colonial history of the United States by purchasing the book Colonial American History Stories 1215 through 1664. The book is a timeline of events from Christopher Columbus until 1664. You can find it on my website, www.mossyfeetbooks.com, on the Timeline of United States History category. Just scroll down to categories, click on the United States Histories category, and you'll find it. There's links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and other online booksellers. You may choose to purchase the book in ebook or softbound versions. An audiobook version is available on Google Play. At the conclusion of this series, I will compile the episodes into an audiobook. This audiobook will be available on Audible, Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, as well as many other audiobook sellers. You can find the podcast on Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, TuneIn, and many other podcast platforms. I publish a video version on YouTube and Rumble. You can also order the books directly